The evening of June 17, 2008. In Seoul, the air around the Gangnam Express bus terminal is filled with the shuffle of thousands of commuters making their way home. It's a scene of absolute grinding normalcy, repeated every day in one of the world's largest cities. But just after 8 o'clock, it would become the scene of a horrific crime. The first reports were a chaotic mess of panic calls to the 119 emergency line. On a patch of lawn near the Honam Line terminal entrance, a small crowd had gathered around a man and a woman. Both were on the ground, bleeding profusely from what would later be counted as dozens of separate stab wounds. Witnesses saw the attacker. It was a tall man who appeared to be wearing a wig. After the attack, he turned away from his victims, calmly crossed the 8-lane road in front of the terminal, and disappeared. He didn't run, he simply walked away. As paramedics fought to save the woman and man's life, the female victim, 37-year-old Miss Kim, managed to speak. With what were essentially her dying breaths, she gave the paramedic the name of her attacker. It was not a stranger. It was her ex-husband, Hwang Ju-yeon. With a positive identification from the victim herself, the case should have been closed within a matter of hours, if not days, but it wasn't. Hwang Ju-yeon would simply cease to exist. Welcome to Korean True Crime with me, your host, Mimi Muziko. Thank you to my amazing patrons for making this show possible. You can support Korean True Crime today on Patreon. Join us on Discord for movie nights featuring films based on real crimes. If you'd like to chat with me and other listeners, you can on my Discord. You can also find original OG Korean True Crime logo merch on our Fourth Wall store today. Link is in the description. Warning: today's episode contains descriptions of domestic violence. Listener discretion is advised. The man who walked away into the Seoul night was Hwang Ju-yeon. In the 17 years that followed, his name would become synonymous with the idea of the perfect escape. He wasn't just another fugitive, he became a fixture, a permanent resident at the top of South Korea's comprehensive most wanted list. By some counts, his face had appeared on the national wanted posters circulated to police stations 25 times, more than any other fugitive. Over the years, the original 2008 photograph has been supplemented with age-progressed renderings and attempts by forensic artists to predict how time and a life on the run might have weathered his features. And despite his unique features, he's never been found. His physical description from 2008 paints a portrait of a man who should have been anything but invisible. He was 180 centimeters tall, just under 5'11", with the powerful, sturdy build of a man accustomed to physical labor and athletics. This was not a person who could easily shrink into a crowd. He definitely stood out. Beyond his stature, he had specific traits that should have made his identification a very simple matter. His eyesight, for one, was exceptionally poor, with a diagnosis of severe astigmatism that registered at less than 0.5 diopters. This condition made thick-lensed glasses an absolute necessity. This was a vulnerability that they hoped would get him caught, because at some point in time, he would need new lenses, a new prescription, or new frames. They believed it would be so predictable that early in the investigation, police were sending out bulletins to over 7,000 optical shops across the country, hoping that someone would identify him and it lead to an arrest. But perhaps his most defining physical characteristic were his ears. He had cauliflower ears, often called dumpling ears in Korea. It's a distinct and permanent deformity caused by repeated blunt trauma, the kind of injury you'd earn from years of grappling sports like judo or wrestling. If you haven't seen cauliflower ears before, they're a condition where the outer ear becomes swollen, deformed, and lumpy. Typically, this is due to repeated trauma or injury. The ear cartilage gets damaged, which causes blood or fluid to collect, which swells and hardens. Your ears end up looking bulbous, bumpy, and oddly shaped. They end up kind of looking like a cauliflower head, hence the name. This physical descriptor did more than just provide a unique identifier, though. It told people he was dangerous. He didn't get those injuries from casual sparring. And because he looked so unique and easily identifiable is precisely what makes his disappearance so infuriating. The identity of the killer was never in question. It was known within minutes of the crime. We're going to use the pseudonym Kim Ga-young for the victim. Kim Ga-young was able to tell the paramedic as her last words who her killer was. There was no mystery to solve, no advanced forensic work required here. The question was never, who did it? The question that has haunted the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency for nearly 2 decades was simpler. Where did he go? How does a man so clearly identifiable, a man with a name, face, history, and multiple unique physical markers, how does he vanish so completely from one of the most technologically advanced and surveyed nations on Earth? A country where, even in 2008, CCTV cameras were already becoming a ubiquitous feature of daily life. Let's go back to the night before we get into the search for Hwang Ju-yeon. On that Tuesday evening, June 17, 2008, 37-year-old Kim Ga-young agreed to meet her ex-husband, 37-year-old Hwang Ju-yeon. She told him she would meet him in a public place, one of the busiest places actually, the Gangnam Express bus terminal. She also chose not to come alone. She brought a male friend. We can use the pseudonym Park Sung-woo. The purpose of the meeting was for Hwang Ju-yeon to bring their daughter so that she could go with Ga-young. I'm unclear what their custody situation looked like, but when I was a child, I was exchanged between my parents like this when I was young. Except I always met in the parking lot across from a Hastings bookstore where I'd beg my dad to rent movies. The information we have about Ga-young and Ju-yeon indicate that Ju-yeon had at the very least visitation rights, because the reason for Ga-young even meeting Ju-yeon at the bus station was to get her daughter. That day, he had told Ga-young if she didn't meet with him, he would abandon their daughter in the terminal for anyone to take her. Ga-young had no choice but to meet him to get her daughter safely and hopefully gain exclusive custody rights. In the early reporting of this case, they blamed Hwang Ju-yeon's violent attack on the presence of Park Sung-woo. They said that he was her new lover and perhaps the two men argued prior to the attack, but this was wrong. Park Sung-woo was simply a friend of Kim Ga-young who was there to support her. Clearly, she felt unsafe around her ex-husband. She felt unsafe enough to need to meet in a public space with a male friend by her side. It is unfortunate that the media chose to paint them as lovers and rewrite the narrative of Hwang Ju-yeon's attack as a jealous ex-husband. The victims deserve the truth of their stories to be told. Although, even if they were lovers, it wouldn't excuse violence towards them. I think it was also used as a way to place some kind of responsibility on Kim Ga-young for what happened. As Ga-young and Sang-woo waited in the small stretch of lawn near the terminal, Hwang Ju-yeon approached them. He was wearing a dark brown wig. Before Ga-young could even acknowledge him or question why he was dressed so oddly, he closed the gap between them. There was no argument, no words exchanged. Hwang Ju-yeon attacked. His first target was Sang-woo. He pulled out a butterfly knife known as a balisong and began stabbing hectically. Ga-young screamed as Hwang Ju-yeon inflicted 14 stab wounds to Sang-woo's stomach and chest, one of which punctured his lungs, while another missed his heart by a mere 3 millimeters. Sang-woo collapsed on the ground as Ju-yeon immediately turned towards Ga-young. He grabbed her from behind and with his other hand, plunged the knife in her back. He would continue to stab quickly and repeatedly until he had stabbed her 18 times, mostly in the back, neck, and throat. It was over in moments. All of this happened in the span of just a minute or two. People who had witnessed the attack had run, screaming, and the police had been called immediately. But Hwang Ju-yeon threw the knife aside and started walking away. He didn't run. He just turned towards the road that led to the parking lot and started walking. He crossed 8 lanes of traffic, and after that, no one saw where he went. He disappeared, away from the CCTV and witnesses. Paramedics arrived and rushed Ga-young and Sang-woo to Gangnam Sacred Heart Hospital. After arriving to the hospital, Kim Ga-young was not doing well. As they started life-saving efforts, though, she was whispering something repeatedly. Her doctor leaned in to hear what she had to say. She told him Hwang Ju-yeon was the assailant. She passed shortly after. Park Sung-woo was rushed into surgery, and despite all odds, he survived. but it would take a very long time for him to recover from his injuries. In the meanwhile, police arrived to the crime scene where they started to broaden the perimeter search. Some police went out on patrols to find Ju-yeon, but he had walked towards a parking lot area, so they were searching for him, assuming he fled in his vehicle. The police didn't expect to find his truck sitting in the parking lot. And what's worse is they found Ga-young and his daughter sitting in the truck waiting for him to return. The daughter's information is understandably kept private, but we can surmise from the dates of their marriage that she was somewhere between 5 and 10 years old. To understand how Hwang Ju-yeon could commit such a senseless act of violence, then just simply disappear, we need to understand who this man was. When researching, I found that he was not a simple man. He was almost like a human chameleon. He was projecting wildly different personas depending on who he was with. This isn't to say that doing so made him a bad person, but what he was doing to hide who he was truly made him a bad person. To the people in his hometown of Namwon, he was a kind, helpful man. All while his entire life, he had a history of violence, deceit, and obsessive control that no one knew about. Professionally, he worked a lot of different jobs, mostly using his large stature and muscles when he could. He had worked as a farmhand, an agricultural machinery broker, a taxi driver, and then he found work as a high-level executive in a multi-level marketing scheme. I find this to be the most telling thing about his personality. Multi-level marketing schemes rely on charismatic people to persuade others to sign up for their company, invest some of their own money and a lot of their time to promote the company or products for little return. The fat cats at the top get fatter while they continue to rope in more and more people to do the work for them. With Hwang Ju-yeon's skills in manipulation and deceit, he was perfect for this job. This job required his skill set, the ability to be persuasive, to gain trust quickly, and to sell a false narrative. These are all skills he was also using in his personal life. His relationship with Kim Ga-yeon was marked by repeating cycles of violence and manipulation. They met and married in 1997, and sometime after that they had their daughter. From what family has said, there really was never a happy moment in their marriage. Just fake smiles to hide the abuse that was happening. Domestic violence was present in the entire marriage, and Ju-yeon treated Ga-young terribly. The habitual domestic violence was what led to their divorce in 2003, but abusive partners rarely accept defeat and loss. He continued to manipulate Ga-young using their daughter. He would hold his daughter hostage, threatening to abandon her or hurt her if Ga-young didn't listen to him. There are many reasons why she did not report this to the police, and unfortunately, to this day, many people believe domestic violence is a family matter to be dealt with privately. Because she had no other choice, Ga-young continued to stay in contact with Ju-yeon. As they remained in contact, he began to persuade her that he was a changed man. He was using every persuasive skill he'd obtained through work on her. He promised he was changed, he'd never hurt her again, and that they would have such a good marriage. And all of this was to convince her that they should remarry to give their daughter a happy family. And what's worse is that it worked. Ga-young agreed, and in 2006, they got remarried. The violence began again the very night that they signed that marriage certificate. I'm sure that was one of the worst nights of her life. I cannot imagine the betrayal. I shouldn't see any comments on this episode blaming Ga-young for returning to Ju-yeon because we cannot know what it is like unless we've lived her life. And again, later that same year, they were divorced. But this time, it wasn't Ga-young. It was Ju-yeon who requested the divorce because he found someone else. This someone else was a woman whom he had been carrying on a 4-year-long affair. This was happening during their first marriage, and for the entirety of the affair, this woman believed Hwang Ju-yeon was single and a good man. He was never violent or mean to her. She had no idea that he had a family because he was always away from home anyways. He was free at the drop of a hat because he didn't care about his family. He was also a very convincing liar. The woman he was having an affair with, we're going to call her Ada, did end up discovering that he was married in 2007 when he applied for the second divorce from Ga-young. She was disgusted by finding out that he was married and she was the other woman, so she tried to leave him. That's when his true inner nature came out. That same anger and violence he had subjected Ga-young to. In the next year, Ada would move on, find a boyfriend who is truly single, and get engaged. Ju-yeon would not allow this. He left Ga-young for her, and now Ara's just moved on, so he began to stalk her and her fiancé. This escalated quickly. He was showing up wherever she was, harassing her on the phone and online, and threatening her. Ara told the police during the investigation that the harassment and threats were so relentless, she believed that he would one day kill her. This is when the police truly realized Hwang Ju-yeon did not snap at the bus terminal. He didn't snap when he saw the other man. The story of his abuse towards Ga-young and Ara revealed that he was a methodical predator. He used violence to control women. He was using his charm to manipulate others and hurt anyone he could to gain control. The belief that he had spontaneously attacked Ga-young and Sang-woo at the bus terminal was negated by what the police learned about Ju-yeon's actions in the days leading up to the attack. The planning began with baiting Ga-young to meet. For weeks, he had been harassing her to meet him, but she always refused. So he escalated. He used the one person she couldn't ignore, their daughter. She had to reluctantly agree because she knew the violence he would inflict. But as far as we know, he had never hurt the daughter. This final attempt to lure her to meet him worked because he said if she didn't come, he was going to abandon their daughter in the middle of the bus terminal so someone could abduct her, and then she wouldn't be his problem anymore. It was guaranteed Ga-young would show up. But even before he messaged her, he had been planning the attack. In the days prior to the murder, Hwang Ju-yeon had attempted a new way of reconnaissance. He placed a call to 119's emergency line, not to report a crime, but to commit one. He told the dispatcher that his ex-wife had left home and she was unreachable by phone. He said Ga-young had threatened to take her own life and he was so worried about her. Of course, that's a lie. He was trying to manipulate her further by using the emergency system. Why would he do this? Well, he was hoping the authorities would treat it like a potential suicide. They'd find her location from her cell phone. Then they'd relay that information to her concerned ex-husband, and he would learn where she was. Thankfully, this attempt to get information from the dispatcher failed. They refused to give him any information. They said the police would conduct the welfare check on their own. He had tried everything he could think of up until this point to find her, to carry out the attack. But now he realized he would need to lure her into a public location. That's when he threatened to abandon their daughter. Ga-young agreed to meet with him, but this was followed by an email from Ju-yeon. He sent an email that was entirely unlike himself, which she had experienced both the abuser and the lover, so she knew his tricks at this point. His email was a complete reversal from his previous harassment, likely to leave a paper trail of him being a good ex-husband. If no one knew he was the attacker, he might have gotten away with it and been able to blame it on a random act of violence. In the email, he feigned defeat. He whined that his business had failed, and he wasn't doing well without her, but he wished her well in her new life without him. This email was not only to lower her guard, but to keep the police off of his trail. He didn't account for the fact that Ga-young would survive long enough to tell the doctors that he was the killer. Back at Ju-yeon's truck, where they found the daughter, they also found ample evidence of more crimes Ju-yeon had planned. He had not only come prepared with the butterfly knife, he had also clearly thought about kidnapping and disposing of his ex-wife's body. The knife attack must have come after he saw his ex-wife with someone else. He had to suddenly change his plan of action because he couldn't kidnap the both of them. Inside his truck was what could be called a kill kit. He had large kimchi fermentation bags, which are plastic wrap bags, burlap sacks, a hand axe, a shovel, and multiple different knives. The public, quick and fast attack wasn't his plan A. That probably wasn't even his plan B. He had planned to abduct Ga-young and kill her somewhere private, then use the tools in his truck to make sure that she vanished forever. The attack on the lawn was what happened when someone was there and he didn't account for it. He couldn't abduct her with another person there who could protect her, identify him, or even bring an end to his plan. After the attack, he had to think of an escape. In the 24 hours following the attack, Hwang Ju-yeon executed a vanishing act so confoundingly confusing, it would literally halt the investigation before it began. There was no manhunt because he had effectively disappeared. From what they discovered, he returned home the next morning and changed clothes and made his way to Shindorim Station, another busy Seoul transit hub. There, he made a call on a payphone to his brother-in-law, Ga-young's brother. He dramatically sobbed and said he was going to end his own life and asked his brother-in-law to take care of their daughter. The police believed he had no intention of taking his own life, and this was exactly like the email. It was just a diversionary tactic. This would be a misdirection, so the police would start looking for a body, rather than a man possibly fleeing the country. It was just another lie. Instead of ending his own life, Hwang Ju-yeon began a bizarre 4-hour trip through the Seoul subway system. He didn't seem to have a destination in mind, but was simply traveling. From Shinderim Station, his transit card was pinged, and CCTV sightings showed he traveled to Yeongdongpo Market Station and then doubled back to Gangnam Station. It wasn't apparent why he was traveling far and then traveled back even further. Investigators believe that he was hoping to camouflage his movements. If he was only seen on some of the cameras, merely minutes apart, then it would create conflicting timelines. How was he at Yeongdongpo Market, also at Gangnam Station, when he traveled from Shinderim Station? It was confusing at first when the police were following him, but he hadn't accounted for the fact that the CCTV coverage was pretty good in these areas. They could clearly see him turning back around to get on the train. Ultimately, he would be seen at 6 different stations in the span of 4 hours, creating a lot of contradictory data, making it incredibly difficult to determine where he actually was. He probably thought he was ingenious for doing this. He was trying to hide in plain sight. But at approximately 2:50 p.m. on June 18, 2008, about 24 hours since the attack, his chaotic traveling came to an end. Hwang Ju-yeon was last seen on CCTV exiting the Bumgae station in the city of Anyang, just north of Seoul. He walked outside, and that is the last time he was ever definitively seen. The man who just spent 4 hours getting as much surveillance time as possible somehow dropped off the face of the earth. He left a huge digital breadcrumb trail just to disappear the second he left the station. For 22 days after Ju-yeon stepped out of Bumgae station, there was nothing. No leads, no trace of him. He didn't use his bank cards. He didn't use his phone, not his transit cards, nothing. But then on July 10th, nearly a month later, the police got a hit. At a PCbang, an internet cafe in Bangbae neighborhood of Seoul, which isn't that far from the crime scene, he did all that traveling just to return back to the neighborhood it happened in. Well, he logged into an account he used for selling agricultural machinery. It was the proof they needed that his suicide threat was a lie. He was alive, in the Seoul area, trying to get back into his old profession selling machinery. And while at the PCbang, he also created a new account on the site, but he was using the alias Ibum-jun. And almost every Korean site requires that you put in your resident number or a phone number attached to your resident number to make an account. It's one of the most annoying parts of traveling to Korea. You basically can't do much online because it requires you to have a visa or ID number. It's annoying for residents too. But in specific cases like these, that's why they justify still using this online security measure. But when he created the new account, he didn't use his ID. No, he used a stolen ID that belonged to a woman who worked at a nearby bar. Keep in mind, this is akin to your social security number in America. He was stealing her identity, although just for a farming tool site. Not sure why that was his top priority. The police believe that this was a sign that he knew how to reinvent himself online to hide, by not hiding. They would never suspect him to just reinvent himself using other people's IDs to open bank accounts, job accounts, and rent property. The police rushed to the PCbang, but he wasn't there by the time they arrived. The PCbang, like many internet cafes, had no CCTV inside for privacy of the members. From there, the investigation led to his hometown. They met with his friends, family, former coworkers, anyone who knew him, none of whom were too helpful, and some were outright uncooperative. The police started to heavily believe that everyone knew something they just weren't saying, and they all had either been helping him or they'd been threatened into staying silent. South Korea's strict privacy laws limited the police's ability to use the full power of facial recognition technology on a national scale, so they were at a standstill. In 2008, this also wasn't quite as accurate, even if they had been able to use it. Plus, if he's going to go out in public, he's probably wearing the K-drama disguise kit, a ball cap, and a mask. Unfortunately, since interviewing the people who knew him led nowhere, the police were left with just speculation and guesses. Years turned into a decade, and now almost 2 decades later, nothing new has been found. The police have repeatedly commissioned advanced facial reconstruction software to create age-progressed mugshots of him, showing what he'd look like in his 40s and now his 50s. They're considering all of the possibilities, that he's had plastic surgery to alter his appearance. If he was going to get plastic surgery, he would probably need to fix his cauliflower ears to blend in. Fix the damage to his ears, change his hair a lot, and maybe some makeup. He'd be unrecognizable, but this is just a theory. The hard truth is that after July 10, 2008, the trail went cold and it stayed cold. It's likely he's not even in Korea anymore. So after all of the years, we're left with the unsettling certainty of a crime and the absolute uncertainty of its aftermath. Hwang Ju-yeon is not a myth, he's not a ghost, he's a known identified killer, a man with a name, a violent history, and a very recognizable face. A man who through cold-blooded deception murdered his ex-wife and evaded one of the most surveyed countries in the world. He didn't just get lucky, he executed a plan that he has continued to work for. The case, however, remains open. As of today, Hwang Ju-yeon is 50 years old. He's still on the most wanted fugitive list, but he is out there somewhere. He could be living out his life in some rural town or hiding in plain sight in Seoul. He could be anywhere. He could be listening to this. The story here didn't end with the crime itself. The crime was just the beginning of an unending set of questions. Questions I wish I could answer. But what we do know is that crime is often predictable. First and foremost, the murder of Kim Ga-young was not random or spontaneous. It was predictable, almost inevitable. This is the outcome of a long documented pattern of intimate partner violence. Criminologically speaking, the red flags in Ju-yeon's history were clear as day. The habitual domestic violence during his marriage, the obsessive stalking, controlling, and harassing of Ara. No, these are signs of escalation. They're textbook examples of coercive control. Coercive control is a pattern of behavior where the perpetrator uses violence, intimidation, and manipulation to exert power over his victim. The murder and attempted murder were not a loss of control in the moment. Realizing his plan to kidnap and murder her were foiled by Sang-woo being there, that was him asserting his power explosively. He was a man whose violence was known to at least 2 women and their families, and we don't even know about who he was growing up. I'm going to bet that he was violent in school as well. In his mind, he could continue treating women this way even until it escalated into homicide. He was getting away with it. Domestic violence is often treated as a private matter, right up until it leads to a murder on a bus terminal lawn. And that's the issue. Holding domestic abusers accountable requires a deliberate shift in how we talk about intimate partner violence. The conversations are always led by victim-blaming frameworks. Why didn't they call the cops? Why didn't they leave? Was there really no way they couldn't have left? The question is an argumentative fallacy. It's ignoring the inescapable psychological manipulation, financial control, isolation, and the very real, historically backed threats of violence that abusers create to trap victims. True accountability can start when we stop questioning victims' choices and start looking at how abusers' actions are enabled. It means funding and simplifying access to shelters, legal aid, and training for law enforcement agents to take threats, stalking, and harassment seriously the first time it happens. We also need to create a community that doesn't make excuses for abusers or tolerates that behavior. We don't continue to support singers who abuse their partners, or support idols who even passively knew about human trafficking. The abuser's actions are always a conscious choice, and we need to address them as such. Then, there's the psychology of Hwang Ju-yeon himself. He represents a deadly combination of traits. On one hand, he's brutish and impulsive. On the other hand, he was calculated and planned out his manipulations. The reconnaissance, the kill kit, the escape. This is not a man who simply snapped. Now, this is the work of a man who possesses an unshakable belief in his own superiority. He saw the manhunt not as a threat, but as a game he would win. And for almost 2 decades, he has. It's almost certain he's not doing this alone. Experts are near unanimous in their belief that he has had multiple forms of assistance. It's highly improbable for him to be able to live off the grid on his own. This is called the conspiracy of silence. This isn't a group of people having meetings to actively plot to hide him, but rather just a network of friends and family who all chose to be uncooperative, chose not to call the police, chose to let him sleep on their couch. Their silence could be from fear because he is a known killer, or it could be some kind of loyalty because he's family or a friend. Everyone's small actions of aiding him culminated into disappearing him for good. This happens often in communities that see certain crimes as a family matter or a community matter rather than a legal problem. The last thing I want to mention is that this case is almost like a time capsule. It's highly unlikely that Hwang Ju-yeon would have been able to escape as easily today. The Seoul of 2008 had CCTV, sure, but absolutely nothing compared to the AI-integrated surveillance network of today. His 4-hour subway maze would have been tracked in real time by facial recognition. His use of a stolen ID at a PC방 would be flagged instantly rather than hours later. His escape was a product of its time. The issue I had with this conclusion is that while I am suggesting this couldn't happen today because of surveillance, this is not an endorsement of increased surveillance. Is catching a murderer like Hwang Ju-yeon worth the cost of public security and public privacy? I can't answer that for you, but I'm curious what you think. In an age that we're beginning to have heightened awareness of what government surveillance truly means through tracking data on our apps, echo chamber political ads, and even location tracking visa holders, is there an alternative? Thank you for joining me on Korean True Crime. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it or leave a review. Check the description for a link to our Discord, Patreon, and find new merch. Find my sources for free on Patreon. Thank you to my patrons for making this show possible. 다음에 또 봐요. See you next time.